God is ruler of the nations. Go to the poor, tell their princes and their kings. Tell to the children of our future generations, He is God and He has done amazing things.
Hello everybody, Stephen Baker here again with Eschatology for Kids, and we're talking about what is God doing in the world? How will the story that He is working out in the creation that He has made, how will it end? That's what eschatology is, remember? How will the story end? That's all. And we've seen how the story began. God made a beautiful world, and He called it good, and He filled it with animals and trees and birds and dogs and ants and all kinds of amazing things, and plants that give us food. And He put a man in it, right? His name was Adam. The first man. Adam just means man. And He gave that man, Adam, a wife, Eve. And He told them to do something, to be fruitful and to multiply, to fill the earth and to subdue it. That was man's purpose. That was Adam and Eve's purpose on the earth, was to be like a king, but also like a gardener, to rule over everything, but also to be a gardener who would make everything beautiful, to bring it all under God's authority and dominion and the joy and the life and the peace that would flow out of that. And that's what it was like. It was a place, the Garden of Eden, a place of peace and life and joy. Until what happened? Do you remember? Well, the dragon, the serpent, the devil, came to Eve and tempted her to do the one thing that God told them not to do. Eat the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And she did. And then she gave it to Adam, her husband, and he ate. And as soon as he ate, what does the Bible say? That all of mankind, Adam, Eve, and all of their coming children, including you and including me, fell into sin. We became people who love to disobey God. We became people who love the darkness instead of the light. I don't mean the darkness like when your mom and dad turn the lights off at night in your bedroom and you're scared. But I'm talking about the darkness of sin. We love it. We love to disobey. And as a matter of fact, you remember what happened? As soon as Adam and Eve disobey God, very soon afterwards they start having children. At least they did that. God commanded them to do it, and they were having children. But what happened with their first children? Their first sons, Cain and Abel. Remember? Cain killed Abel. He murdered him. Why? Because he was jealous. Have you ever been jealous of your brother or your sister? Have you ever hated him or her in your heart? Wanted what they had and wished that they didn't have it? That's because we're sons of Adam and Eve. Sons and daughters of Adam and Eve. And we have this sin in our hearts. We're born with it. Well, that's not the end of the story, though, is it? Because if that was the end of the story, then God would have wiped us all out and ended the story right there. Okay, Adam and Eve, I gave you a job to do. I gave you a rule that you must not eat this fruit, and you ate the fruit. Okay, done. That's not what He did. Do you remember what He did? He made a promise. And the promise is that He would send a champion, a hero, a savior, who would do what? Do you remember? Crush the head of the dragon. Crush the head of the serpent. Totally annihilate him and bring peace and joy to the whole world. That's what God promised to do. That's in Genesis 3. Well, what happens after that? Well, because of our sin, starting with Adam and Eve and then Cain and Abel, and things just get worse and worse and worse. And it gets so bad that it comes to a point in the history of the world where God looks down from heaven on all the people and he says, all they want to think about and all they want to do is evil all the time. It's all they want to do. Except for one man, Noah. God looked and saw everyone, the whole world filled with sin except Noah. It says that Noah was a righteous man, a blameless man. He knew the Lord, and he trusted him, and he obeyed him. And he did that because God was kind to him. God showed favor to Noah and made him want to obey. And so you remember what happened? He told Noah to build an ark, a big, big, big boat, and he was going to send rain on the earth, and he was going to flood the earth, and the water was going to come up from under the ground, and the water was going to come down from above the sky, and he was going to kill everybody except those who were in the ark. And that is exactly what everyone deserved. It's actually what Noah deserved too, and his family. But God has had kindness on them, had grace on them. And he flooded the world, remember? But he didn't leave it at that. He restarted the world. Because after the flood, the waters went back to where they came from, and the plants started growing again, and the ark landed on dry ground, and God said to Noah, what? He said a couple of things. The first thing he said was, I'll never do this again. I'm never going to wipe out the world with a flood ever again. And I'm going to put a sign in the sky so that whenever it rains, I will know. This is God talking. God will remind himself, I'm never going to do that again. And you know what the sign was? It's the rainbow. And that's a whole nother story. The rainbow is pretty neat. The rainbow, when we think of rainbows, we usually think of like little bows that girls put in their hair, ribbons, pretty things. But that's not what that means. The rainbow is like the bow that your dad might use to shoot deer during archery season. That's the kind of bow it is. And if you've ever seen a rainbow, you'll see that it's like a big bow, right? Hung up in the sky. And where is it pointed? Is it pointing down at us? No. It's pointed up at God. So when God hangs the rainbow in the sky, he's saying, I promise to you that I will never wipe out all of mankind like that again. And if I do, may I be shot with my own bow. Of course, God never breaks his word. But there it is, the bow hanging in the sky, hung up on the peg. He's done with that one. It's just amazing. Very amazing. Well, what happens after Noah and after the flood? God makes a promise, says, I'll never do this again, but he tells him to do something. What does he tell him to do? Well, it's exactly the same thing he told Adam and Eve. Be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. Adam, or Noah, is like the new Adam. Adam failed. Here's Noah. Noah, we have to start over again. So you and your sons and their wives and your wife, we have to be fruitful and multiply and fill the world with what? With people. People who will serve the Lord and worship him and obey him. That's the idea. Now, is that what happened? Well, they did fill the world. They started to anyway. They started to have lots of children. And in a few generations, there were a lot of children, a lot of people. But I want you to remember something. What did those people do? God said to Noah, be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth and subdue it. spread out over the whole world and make the whole world into a beautiful garden. I know it's tainted by sin, but we still have this work to do, right? And it's going to be harder now because of sin, but do it anyway. That's what we were supposed to do. That's what they were supposed to do. But what did they do? Well, you remember what happens next. We call it the Tower of Babel. So all these people who were supposed to go and fill the earth, they said, we don't want to do that. We want to stay right here. And they were supposed to go and subdue it under the authority of God, the Lord, Yahweh, the one true and living God who made the world and everything in it. And they said, no, we don't want to do that either. We're going to build a tower, and it's going to be high, and it's going to, on top of it, we're going to meet with who? The Lord? The true and living God, God the Father Almighty, maker of heaven and earth? No. We're going to build a tower, and on the top of it, we're going to build a temple, and in that temple, we are going to call down to us, not God, but these fallen, wicked spirits, and we're going to worship them. Yeah, that's what's going on. It says in Genesis that they built a tower that would reach into the heavens. That doesn't mean they thought that these people weren't stupid, okay? They weren't dumb. They could build a massive, massive building. Okay, and we can't to this day figure out how they did it. We would have used big machines. Well, they didn't have those as far as we know. How did they do it? Well, they were very smart. They're not stupid. They don't think that when they build the tower to reach into the heavens, they're going to like go to space. What they're doing is they're bringing the heavens, the gods, the false gods, down to them where they can worship them. And these false gods are real. Oh, they're very real. The serpent, the dragon, who tempted Eve in the garden, well, he was real. He's not the only one. There are many. And so, we do not want to fill the earth and subdue it. We do not want to worship the Lord. We want to do it our way. We want to stay right here, and we're going to not worship the Lord. What does the Lord do? Well, he sees, of course, what's going on. He knows why they're doing it. And he says, I'm going to go down there, and I'm going to stop them. And the way he stops them is really interesting. He changes their language. Maybe you're learning a language. Maybe you're learning Spanish or French or Chinese. I don't know. And you've heard people talk different languages. Surely, right? And you don't know what they're talking about. If you don't know Spanish, you don't know what they're talking about. If you don't know Chinese, you don't know what they're talking about. How can you work together with someone that you don't know what they're talking about and they can't understand you and you can't understand them? Well, that's what God did. This is the origin, the beginning of languages, of a multitude of languages. God says, I'm going to confuse their speech. That's why we call it the Tower of Babel, right? Where blah, blah, blah. They couldn't understand each other. And what happened? Well, they separated from one another and they filled the earth. Exactly as God commanded. That's what they did. Now, they weren't doing it for the Lord, but the people began to spread around. And right at that moment, this is just amazing. Just amazing. God said, you know what? You people want to worship false gods? Fine. I'm going to give you false gods. And they're going to rule over you, and they're not good. And this explains the way the world is, even to today, although not like it used to be. All right? False gods around the whole world, we call them pagans, those who worship false gods, or we call them idolaters, those who worship something else besides the true and living God, the God and Father Almighty who made the heavens and everything in the earth and all of us, everything in it, anyone who worships someone other than God, we call pagans, all right, or idolaters. And all the religions, all the world is filled with religions. And before Jesus came, all of those religions had to do with making yourself righteous before the gods. And you know how they did that? One of the main ways they did that was by killing things, killing people. Sacrifice, blood. Not the blood of sheep and goats, but the blood of people. These gods, these false gods, are bloodthirsty. You don't want to be under the rule of one of these evil gods. Now remember, they're not the true and living God. They're just angels. They're just creatures that God made. But they want to be worshipped. That happened right after the Tower of Babel. You can read about this, by the way, Mom and Dad, in Deuteronomy 32. Especially in the English Standard Version, as a good translation of that passage. I recommend it to you. Now, this is the important part. Okay, you ready? This is the important part. Man fell. They sinned. They got really bad. God destroyed the world with a flood, except for Noah. Promised never to do that again. His descendants grew up, didn't obey God, tried to do things on their own and worship false gods and not fill the earth. He scattered them around the world and gave them false gods as a punishment, really. But what? There is coming a day when all of the nations, all of those nations that began at the Tower of Babel, will come and worship the true and living God. Yes. Yes, indeed. That's exactly what God has always planned. And that is what he is doing right now. And that is what he will do by the time we get to the end of the story. Let me read a couple things to you, and we'll be done. In the Psalms are filled with this. Psalm 2 says this: "Why are the nations in an uproar, and the peoples," those are the pagans that don't worship the true and living God, "devising a vain thing, an empty, useless idea? The kings of the earth take their stand, and the rulers take counsel together against the Lord and against his anointed, saying, let us tear their fetters apart and cast their cords from us." We don't want to obey him. We don't want to have anything to do with the Lord or with Jesus. He who sits in the heavens laughs. The Lord scoffs at them. Then he will speak to them in his anger and terrify them in his fury, saying, "But as for me, I have installed my king upon Zion, my holy mountain. I will surely tell of the decree of the Lord. He said to me, you are my son. Today I have begotten you. Ask of me, and I will give you. I will surely give the nations as your inheritance, and the very ends of the earth as your possession. You shall break them with a rod of iron. You shall shatter them like earthenware." God says, I have set up my son. My son. We know who this is. This is Jesus. I have set up my son as the king of the world. And all the nations are his. Psalm 22 says the same thing. All the ends of the earth will remember and turn to the Lord. And all the families of the nations will worship before you, for the kingdom is the Lord's, and he rules over the nations. Psalm 86 says the same thing. There is no one like you among the gods, O Lord, nor are there any works like yours. All nations whom you have made shall come and worship before you, O Lord, and they shall glorify your name. For you are great and do wondrous deeds. You alone are God. Now, does that have anything to do with eschatology? Does that have anything to do with the story that God is working out in the world under His complete control? Oh, yes. Oh, yes, it does. He has a king, and He has a kingdom. And that is really important. All right? We'll talk about that more later.
Our God is ruler of the nations. Go tell the poor, tell their princes and their kings. Tell to the children of our future generations. He is God and He has done amazing things. Let's tell the children of our future generations. He is God and He has done amazing things.